good afternoon. Thank you all for coming to our Unity Catalog Lunch and Learn with Databricks and Kubrick. My name's Ben Roche, and I'm going to be hosting the session today along with Femi. So my background is in data engineering. I worked at Kubrick Group as a data engineer and squad lead for the past 4 years. And I'm also a Databricks Champion. I've been working in a range of different sectors across a number of different clients to help build data engineering solutions with an emphasis on Databricks. So the format of the session today is Femi will be giving a brief introduction to some wider context of Databricks, and then the remainder of the session will be about 35-40 minutes from myself, giving a deep dive into some of the Unity Catalog features and the explanation of what Unity Catalog is. And then we'll have time for some Q&A at the end as well. So with that being said, over to Femi. He'll give a bit of an introduction as well.
Thanks for the intro, Ben. Really appreciate it. Hi, everyone. My name's Femi Akintoye. I work within Databricks' growth segment here. So to de-Databricks that somewhat and explain why most of you are here and kind of give level set and give expectations. Our team is predominantly focused on supporting new feature activation, explaining what the benefits are, but also explaining in which situations either might be right for you or in which situations you might be able to integrate with other technologies that exist within your existing architecture. I've been with the organization for, again, just under 3 years now. So I've seen multiple progressions, iterations, evolutions of our platform. And so it's going to be awesome to position and just spend the first couple of minutes just positioning what our current iteration and evaluation of the lakehouse platform looks like and where Unity Catalog comes in and fits into to enable that. So just next slide, please, Ben. Awesome. So I think everyone's probably heard this old adage that, every company and all the companies that win in the next 5 or 10 years are going to have to start integrating generative AI, but also being data-centric at their core. And most organizations are probably going to struggle. It's quite difficult to manage all of the different data assets you have, all the different data sources, track lineage. You want to start to democratize data and give generative AI features and chatbots to members of staff who might not be super data literate or Python engineers, because we all can't be Apple or Netflix. But tracking that and having responsible and safe usage and democratization of data is going to be a vision that a lot of organizations are going to struggle with. Just build it out, please, Ben. Thank you. Data and AI governance is going to be quite siloed. For different business units, it's going to be quite difficult to trace that lineage. Data privacy and control are going to increasingly become challenged by AI, and making sure that it's responsibly rolled out across businesses is going to be imperative. But again, it's also highly dependent on technical staff if you don't have the right tooling behind it. And for some of the organizations I know that are on the call today, from your small digital native tech organizations to your larger corporations that might have sub-data teams, we all can't have 100 data engineers supporting us and supporting the development of the platforms. And this is effectively where our next evolution of Databricks is coming in and what it's supporting to enable. Let's next slide, please, Ben. Thank you. So I'm sure most of you on the call have probably seen how we're positioning the data intelligence platform and the features behind it. In short, and to focus on what we're going to focus on today, the data intelligence platform and its underlying engine is effectively integrating what we've been developing within Databricks for the last few years now and utilizing as staff within Databricks and integrating generative AI features, not just to power the platform, but also as features that people can access. And today I'm really kind of excited and stoked to be focusing on the Unity Catalog aspect and almost explaining to you how best you can get started with the feature, but also enabling all of you on the call to then go ahead and have really effective cataloging and security, regardless of how much Databricks tooling you are using today. It's a super powerful tool. It's an awesome tool that thousands of our customers have had a massive amount of success with. So yeah, really excited to position where Unity Catalog fits within the data intelligence platform and helps to enable not just generative AI, but also operative data warehousing and BI use cases across your technology and enablement and stack as well. Next slide, please, Ben. And as a platform, and even as a tooling within Unity Catalog, what we're aiming to do is make it simple allow natural language features that Ben's going to go into in a bit more detail around Unity Catalog that non-technical members of staff can go and use natural language to query your data sets. Use AI to start to understand the data, understand where people in the organization are using certain dashboards, understanding which dashboards are in demand and how many people from which business units are using it. But also private, understanding how secure your data sets are so you can trust it to roll out across an enterprise is going to be super key. So that's it from me. I'm going to hand over and can leave you in Ben's capable hands. And again, as we go through the session, if you have any questions or anything that's top of mind, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom. Feel free to ask the team, and I'm more than happy to help. Over to you, Ben.
That's great. Thanks, Femi. So just going to set some context and some kind of housekeeping rules for today's session. So as well as myself and Femi, we've got someone called David Burnham in the chat. David's a Databricks champion as well. And he's a solution architect and head of data engineering at Kubrick Group. So if you have any questions kind of throughout the presentation, to avoid interrupting the flow, David might respond to those in the chat as well. You should be able to see the Q&A bar at the top, and you should be able to ask any of us, either myself, David, or Femi, a question as well. So this is just making sure you're in the right place. So as Femi had mentioned there, we're going to be talking about Unity Catalog today. The purpose of this session is to understand what UC is, what the features are, why you should consider upgrading to Unity Catalog if you're currently a Databricks customer, how to get the most out of UC at your organization, and how it can fit into an enterprise governance strategy as well. So kind of the bigger picture there too. Just to say as well, this session really isn't intended for those of you looking for like a specific migration plan and how you can upgrade to Unity Catalog. But there are a number of other resources at Databricks and training materials on that. So if that's of particular interest to you, send us a message after this session, and we can signpost that to you as well. And the final thing to say is I'm going to be saying the words Unity Catalog quite a lot, so please allow me to use UC as an acronym for that one. So anytime I say UC, I'm referring to Unity Catalog. Okay, let's get started. So a bit of background, just briefly, one slide on what Kubrick is. So Kubrick is a next generation consultancy, and we're an elite delivery partner of Databricks. So we support over 100 organizations in the UK and US to embrace next gen technology. And we have a diverse workforce of over 1,000 consultants with a range of different skill sets across data, cloud, and AI. Kubrick consultants can be retained as full-time employees. And more recently, in the past year or two, we've been building out our Databricks specialism, which is one of the reasons why we're speaking to you today about Unity Catalog. So myself and David are an example of two of our champions. We have 4 other champions as well at Kubrick Group. And we can really help you support and build out your most complex Databricks use cases. And just the final line to say, we accelerate delivery and we build amazing teams at Kubrick. So before I do a deep dive into the features, I kind of just want to do a scene setting for those of you which are currently using Databricks but aren't using Unity Catalog. So data and AI governance is very complex. So this slide is intended to showcase the kind of complexity of modern organizations and their data teams. So data touches all areas of the business, and it's becoming much harder to respond to necessary questions about your data. So in your organization, regardless of the size, there will be a number of data consumers and a number of different data personas that have necessary questions that they need to get answered. And some of the questions are kind of shown on the slide here. So how can we secure our data assets? Who's accessing these assets and how? And are we meeting regulatory compliance? Now, it's worth saying as well that there'll be a number of different tools and technologies that you might be using. So that can further compound the problem and make things quite tricky. Now, the real question for a data governance team is, if you can't answer these questions, what are the risks? And that can range from something as simple as having an incomplete view of your data estate to full-blown, regulatory non-compliance, which is obviously unacceptable regardless of the sector you're working in. So the question here is, what's the solution? And there's really 2 things here. So one is there's a people process which needs to happen. So organizational people change. And the second one, of course, is the technology in this case. And we're going to be focusing on the second one. So that's the Unity Catalog piece in the context of Databricks. So what is Unity Catalog? So in one line, Unity Catalog is one governance model for structured and unstructured data and your AI. Now, typically Unity Catalog is used to govern all assets in your Databricks estate, but this is just intended to show that it can actually interplay with a number of other technologies at your organization as well. So a key one to highlight on this slide is external data sources. If you're looking to govern things like Snowflake or Google BigQuery, then you can use Unity Catalog and connect to those data sources as well. So what value does Unity Catalog bring? Before I do a deep dive into the features, it gives you unified visibility into your data and AI. It gives you a single permission model, which we'll be doing a deep dive into later. It gives you AI-powered monitoring and observability and open data sharing as well. So if that's what it offers, what are the features? And each of those bluey-green boxes you can see on the screen here are specific features that you will get from Unity Catalog. So inherently, Unity Catalog is a feature-rich product. So we're not going to have time to do a deep dive into every single one of these today, but we're going to be focusing on a large number of them. And I will signpost to other features of Unity Catalog at the end that we didn't have time to cover today. Okay, with that being said, let's kick off with the 5 key features which I'm looking to do a deep dive on now. So the first is centralized metadata, user management and access controls, which means defining each of these once and securing everywhere across your Databricks estate. The second is fine-grained access controls at a row and column level. So if you're looking to filter sensitive data in a particular table. The next one is data lineage, so automatically grabbing data lineage for all of your objects in your Databricks estate. The fourth one is going to be data search and discovery, and there's some quite intelligent ways you can document and discover data in your lakehouse. And the fifth one is delta sharing. So this is about sending data securely outside of your organization or between regions in your existing organization. So with that being said, let's kick off with the first one, which is centralized metadata and access controls. So as I mentioned at the start of this session, I'm expecting that everyone on the call is either working with Databricks or is indeed a Databricks customer. So if you are, you would be familiar with the left-hand side of the screen currently. So at your organization, you've likely got this set up on the left, where you have individual workspaces for different groups or different business units. And each of the user management, metastore, and access controls is handled at the workspace level. So what that means is you have a workspace admin that will be managing all of your users, your metastores, and the access controls there. In Unity Catalog, this now happens at the account level. So you have a Databricks account which sits above all of your workspaces, and all of your user management, metastores, and access controls will be managed through the account console. And you might be thinking, well, what's the benefit of that? So the benefit is you get one simplified single view of your users and assets across your Databricks estate. And that makes things very simplified. So you can access that via the account console. The account console can be used to manage access for all of your users and your groups. So you no longer have disparate groups between your different workspaces. And similarly, access to data can also be granted centrally. Prior to Unity Catalog, if you wanted someone data in Workspace 1 to be shared with Workspace 2, there wasn't a very easy way to do that. But now, because we have central governance, then you can do that a lot more straightforwardly. And then finally, you might be thinking, well, if I'm a small organization, I only have one workspace, I'm only using Databricks in a small part of the business, what's the benefit of moving to Unity Catalog and governing at the account console? And the real answer is, well, there's not really a downside to this. So it's quite straightforward to migrate to the account console, and it allows you to better scale as you increase the number of workspaces and number of users and groups at your organization. So I'm just going to illustrate this with an example. So at Kubrick, we have about 1,000 consultants. At any time, there might be something in the region of 200 that are working on a Databricks project, either internally or externally. And you can imagine that's quite a large number of users to manage. And in the past, before Unity Catalog, we would be setting up individual workspaces for different projects or training groups, and we'd have separate groups across those workspaces. Now, with Unity Catalog, we can have all of those users and all of those groups managed at the account console, and it's a lot more straightforward to keep track of who has access to what in our workspaces. So that's the centralized metadata and access controls. What are the actual access controls? So how do we actually grant permissions to objects and to users? So there's two ways. For those of you which are SQL savvy, you have the one on the left-hand side, and it's basically a very simple SQL syntax to grant permissions on objects. So grant the permission level on the object, so a table, view, model, to the group. So in this case, that's engineers in this example. Now, if you're an admin and you're not that comfortable with SQL, there's also a friendly UI you can use. So it's essentially a tick box for which of the privileges you want to apply, and you just specify the group in that box as shown here. So on the right-hand side, you can see the group analysts is being granted the select privileges on this table, which is called department. So once we've applied our access controls, how does Unity Catalog enforce them? So this is the kind of giving a high-level overview of the life cycle for a particular user. So an individual user in your Databricks workspace might be running a query against a cluster or a SQL warehouse, at which point the access controls from Unity Catalog gets applied. So we will check, for example, if that user or that group has select privileges on that particular object. The other thing that you can see on this slide is that there is an audit log for all events which happen in Unity Catalog. And the second thing to show us as well is we have external locations and credentials. So prior to Unity Catalog, you might be familiar with using things called mount points. Mount points are typically quite insecure. So these have been replaced by external locations and credentials. So once the permissions are applied before you query the table, you can then also use external locations and storage credentials to manage access to your underlying S3, ADLS, or GCS bucket. So that gives a high-level overview of the metadata and centralized access controls and what those access controls actually are. So let's move on to now to more fine-grained access controls, which is at the row and the column level. Now, on these next couple of slides, there is some SQL, but I'll be talking it through quite gradually, so it should be accessible to everyone on the call. So this is a fictional example where we have an organization which is using food data, and there's a table called dinner. There's a database or schema called UC lineage, and there's a catalog called DB demos. And this table happens to have 3 rows in it, and you can see it's got a combination of food in the full menu column. So without row masking, I can see every record in that table when I run a select statement from my notebook, which is what you'd expect. So how do I apply row mask? So I will create a function called dinner filter, and it's going to apply on the recipe ID column. And then there's a bit of logic here which says, if you're a member of this group called UC Diners, and UC Diners is a group which I've created before this session, then return everything, return true. Otherwise, just show me the records where recipe ID is 0, or in other words, just show me the first row. And then when I query from that table, if I'm not a member of the UC Diners group, I can only see the first row. So that's an example of how you can filter rows based on a certain group. And I've kept this quite simple, but you can imagine this can be expanded to more complex use cases. And I will touch on some other real-world scenarios of using row and column filters later. So that's my row filtering example. What about column masking? So in this case, we again create a function, and this time I'm going to call it starters only. So the idea here is that you're only going to get the starters from that full menu column. And you notice that there's a case statement in the body of the return. So we're basically saying if this group, or if this person that's running this query is a member of the UC Diners group, then give them the whole column. Otherwise, if they're not a member of the UC Diners group, then they can see a redacted version of that column. So when we run this query as someone that's not a member, we should expect to see some asterisks after the starter of the table. And one thing to note here, both with row and column level masking, is that these are reproducible and reusable. So you can see I've created the function. It has nothing to do with the table at this stage. It's only when I run the alter table statement that I apply this mask on that table. So it can be used across multiple tables. So when I run that query, I run select star from dinner. And notice in this case, I haven't specified the catalog or the schema. And that's because prior to the running this query, you can set the catalog and the schema that you want to work with. Like when you're running SQL locally, you could run use database. It's the same with that in Databricks as well. And in this case, they're not a member of the UC Diners group, so the full menu column is masked, and we can only see the starters here. So I can appreciate those are quite contrived examples, but hopefully those are just to show you the simplicity of it and how the actual syntax works. Now I'm going to talk through some potential use cases and how you might build up this logic to create some real-world applications. So the first is personalized user dashboards. So you can write logic using row and column filters so that when a user queries a table, they can only see data associated with themselves. And that can be quite useful for BI and reporting purposes if you want to track information just for one user. The next one is filtering and redacting PII. So you could use a column mask, for example, to remove the last few characters of a certain PII field. The next one is refining data for specific business groups. So if you have an organization where a certain business group or a business user needs to only see a certain region, then you could apply a row level filter so that only certain groups can see certain regions' data. And then the final thing to say here is there's a lot more complex use cases that we can expect to build up. So logic can be defined on multiple columns. We can use user-defined functions, and we could have mapping tables as well for lookups. So this is quite a powerful tool that allows you to build up quite complex row and column level access controls on your tables. So I'm going to cover data lineage, and then there'll be a small intermission where I just recap what we've covered so far. And I noticed there's some questions in the chat. I'll pass it over to David just to not interrupt the flow of the presentation at the moment. So what is lineage? So in Databricks, we have automated lineage capture when you're using Unity Catalog. So this is going to be tracked down to the table and column level. And then we'll use the same permission model that you've seen at the start of the presentation to ensure access is as expected on your lineage as well as the underlying tables. So what does lineage cover? It covers most things. So tables, dashboards, workflows, notebooks, feature tables, files, and DLT. And the next slide is going to be showing you what that lineage view actually looks like if you interact with that in Databricks. So we're going to extend that same example I used for the row and column mask and look at some food examples and show how some of these tables have been put together. So before we look at the lineage graph in the middle, I'm just going to focus on the right-hand side here and say that all of those things which I mentioned before are captured in your lineage graph. So you can see in this case, there are two tables which use the dinner price table, because that's the table I'm exploring the lineage for. There's one notebook, there's a dashboard, and there's also a SQL query that uses the dinner price table too. The next thing to say is, well, how was this dinner table created? And there's some SQL here just to show the create table statement. But all you need to know is that it's a concatenation, so a combination essentially, of the app, main, and desserts column from the menu table, which we haven't seen previously. And the important thing here is you can see that automatically captured in the lineage view. So you can see those three columns are being combined to make full menu, which is really powerful. And you can imagine a scenario where you have lots of complex logic, a table with a number of columns, and it's flowing through your bronze, silver, and gold medallion architecture in your Databricks lakehouse. And you might be then renaming some of those columns as you go along. Or you might have questions from business users of what does this column in my gold table refer to? And you can track the lineage back to see what column led to that output at the end. So that's if you have access to all of those tables, but what if you don't have access to a certain table in your lineage process? So for this example, this is showing a case where a user has access to the dinner table has read access to the dinner table, but they don't have access to the upstream table, which we saw in the previous slide. And the important thing to note here is they can still see the full menu column being produced, but because they don't have access to the upstream table, they can't see what column that's going into feed in the gold table or the upstream table of their view. So that shows as masked in the lineage view. Now, something which was mentioned to me before is that if you think about this, more likely example is you're going to have a number of business users that are going to be querying gold tables or aggregate views in your lakehouse. And actually, they probably won't be able to see the bronze tables or the raw tables in your lakehouse. And the same applies here. So if you had access to the gold table at the end, you'd be able to see the lineage coming up to a point, and then the bronze table would appear as masked. So you don't know what the data in the raw table is. So that's how you can view the Lineage Explorer. Something I promised at the start of this session was we're going to talk about enterprise governance at scale. So how does Unity Catalog as a governance solution interact with other catalogs? So the way Unity Catalog will work is you'll run that as we've seen before, and you'll run your code on a cluster or SQL warehouse. It'll be sent to a lineage surface, which is Unity Catalog, and we will capture the table and column lineage. And you can either explore the lineage in the UI, which is what we've just seen on the previous slides, or you can export that to your external catalog. So if you're a larger organization that has a number of different technologies that you're trying to capture and get visibility over, you might be using one of those three, for example, of Calibra, Elation, or Purview. Now, the way this would work is there's an API that you can access your Unity Catalog lineage data, and that can be accessed and then exported to one of your enterprise catalogs to give you a catalog of catalogs, if you like. And it's worth saying as well, so at Kubrick, we recently did a 2-week project where we built a number of different assets in Unity Catalog and tried exporting those to Calibra. And that was really successful, but I'm not going to go into too much detail now because that would be a whole presentation in itself. But if you have any questions about exporting data from Unity Catalog to other catalogs, then feel free to reach out to us afterwards as well. So let's recap where we've got to so far. So we've covered centralized metadata, user management, and access controls. We've covered fine-grained access controls at the row and column level with your row and column masks. We've covered data lineage, both in the UI Explorer and how you can send that externally to other catalogs. And on the right-hand side as well, you can see a summary of the first piece, so the centralized metadata and access controls applying across workspaces. You can see the SQL syntax, and you can see the different objects that exist within Unity Catalog as well. So the next thing we're going to move on to is data search and discovery and delta sharing. So how do you go about finding assets in your Databricks lakehouse? So we're going to continue that dinner example that I showed earlier. In this case, I'm demonstrating what's called the advanced search feature in Databricks. So if you're an organization that has a number of different tables and views and other Databricks objects, it can be quite tricky to know what there is and how to find them. So the first thing to say is, in this case, I've searched for tables with food data. And it's worth noting that in the dinner table, there was no real explicit information that said it was food or it was a food table. So it's an intelligent search to find information within that table and return that here as well. The way you get to that is just by clicking at the top of your workspace that has been enabled for Unity Catalog and clicking on the advanced search button. The next thing to show and kind of help with your discovery process is there's this signal bar, which isn't what the signal is at a table. This signal bar is to show the popularity of the table. So in this case, there's not much signal on this table, which suggests that there hasn't been many queries. And in Unity Catalog, we do track what queries are made against all tables. So you would expect if there's a number of business users using this table, it can be quite helpful to see or compare between two different tables, maybe that have similar names or similar data sets. And the final thing to say on this slide is, notice there's a description of this table. So it says the dinner table contains information related to different recipes, etc. And this is going to lead me on to the next point, which is one of the AI-powered features in Databricks, which is AI-powered comments. So you can see in the middle of this screen here that there is an AI suggested comment for my table. And you can read through that at leisure, but it's a pretty good description of what the table actually contains. So let's accept that comment, but you can also edit that to add your own information into that comment as well. So we'll accept that comment and we'll do two other things. We're going to add tags. So tags essentially help you in the same way that you can add a tag in Azure for like an infrastructure or a certain resource in Azure. You can add tags to your objects in Databricks. And this is really helpful for cataloging information and also for searching information. So in that advanced search we saw previously, you can search for specific tags or specific key value pairs, which is what tags are represented as. The next thing is to show we've accepted the AI suggested comment for the table. And then not only at the table level, but we can add AI suggested comments for the columns in the table. Now, if you imagine you have a table with 50, 100, 200 columns, it can be quite tricky to know what each of those do. But with Unity Catalog, it's very easy to do that because you're going to get an AI suggested comment. You can edit if you want to. But just to highlight the AI suggested comment of the full menu table here. So it says a complete menu of dishes available for dinner, including appetizers, main courses, and desserts. Now it's got that from the menu table, which was a downstream table of the dinner table. So that's a really powerful way to add information to your and enrich the data that you're storing in different tables. So that's a good way to discover your data. What about delta sharing? So this is a slight change of tack compared to the previous features. As I mentioned at the start, delta sharing is for sending data to other regions within your Databricks workspace, within your organization, or sending data outside of your organization as well. So how does delta sharing work? And once I describe this, we'll come on to some benefits and some reasons you might want to use delta sharing. So the way it works is within your lakehouse, you will have a number of delta files in your cloud storage container. You can go and create a share and a recipient in your Databricks workspace, and that will create a pre-signed short-lived URL, which you can then send to someone, and they can access the data in your cloud storage container as read-only for a predefined amount of time. It's worth saying as well, once they receive that information and once they receive that connector, they can access the data in a number of different connectors. So in the right-hand side, you can see Power BI, Apache Spark, and Pandas. In preparation for this session, I did an example where we connected to the dinner data in Pandas and then did some further transformations. So what does it actually look like? So you create a share, which is a read-only collection of tables in your Databricks workspace. You can then add certain tables. So for example, I could add that dinner table I showed earlier to the share. You then create a recipient, which is intended to be one person or organization. They will then get access to that short-lived pre-signed URL for a defined amount, for a length of time that you define up front. And then they can have read access to the tables that are in that share. And this is what it looks like when you access the URL. So the recipient that you're sending the data to can then download this credential file and then connect to the data in Pandas, another Databricks region, or Python or Power BI, for example. So why might you consider using delta sharing? So one example is easier sharing of large data sets compared to some poorly scalable SFTP servers. So I've worked with organizations in the past where we've had limits over how much data we can send over SFTP on a particular server, and some issues with setting it up and getting configurations right. It's very straightforward with delta sharing. You want to send data to your external customers and partners. So for example, sharing data with suppliers to improve supply chain efficiency, or you might want to share data temporarily with auditors if you have, say, auditors coming in for a set amount of time that they need read access on certain tables. You then might want to share data between different lines of business across cloud regions. And finally, penultimately, commercialize your data. So this is a big one for delta sharing. This gives you a mechanism by which you can essentially commercialize the data that you have access to, because you can define how long someone should have access to the data, who has access to it, and it's read-only as well. So there's a risk mitigation there. And finally, you're going to reduce data replication, because you might be thinking, well, I could just save these tables and send them externally, but then I don't have the governance in place that I would get with, defining the amount of time someone should have access to something, seeing in my Databricks workspace who has access to that data externally. So this prevents you having to create multiple copies of your data and sending it externally. And just to say a book worth reading, or a small ebook that has 10 to 15 pages in it, on delta sharing, gives some more detailed examples of where customers have used this to commercialize their data or solve some of these typical problems that you get in organizations. So let's have a quick recap. So what have we covered? So as mentioned at the start, Unity Catalog gives you a unified visibility into your data and AI. It gives a single permission model, which is that ANSI SQL that we saw at the start, or the UI. There's AI-powered monitoring and observability. There's open data sharing through delta sharing. And it's worth mentioning, so we saw these features at the start. So which of these have we actually covered in detail today? And we've covered discovery, and we've covered the access controls. We've covered lineage. We haven't touched on monitoring and auditing, so I'm going to touch on that on the next slide. And we've also covered delta sharing as well, which is data sharing. So what I'm going to do on the next slide is to talk through some other features of Unity Catalog, and just to signpost you to these and say maybe you can do some extra reading on these around after this session. So what else is there in Unity Catalog? So as I said, it's very feature rich. We've kind of only just scratched the surface in today's session. There are system tables. So this is something which is enabled in Databricks workspaces. And you can see all of the costs for your Databricks workspaces really clearly, and you can build a dashboard on these system tables. So one single view and one single place to access cost information about your Databricks estate, which is really powerful for monitoring. The next one is volumes. So volumes is another data object in Unity Catalog. It's used to govern access to files. So your files can be added to a volume, and then you can access those in your Databricks workspace. This is a typical case for data science or ML, where you're going to be using more unstructured data than you might see in data engineering use cases, for example. The next one is lakehouse monitoring. So you can get detailed monitoring and quality controls and information about the quality of your data across your organization. So with lakehouse monitoring, you could expect to see the number of nulls in your tables automatically recorded, data drift, and any other information about your data that you'd like to capture, like standard deviation, means, things like that. The next one is Lakehouse Federation. So I touched on this at the start when I showed you the Snowflake, Redshift, and Google BigQuery examples. So you might have a number of different other technologies that you're using in your business, and you might want to govern those under Unity Catalog as well. And you can do this through Lakehouse Federation. The way I tend to think of it as someone that's used Power BI in the past is it kind of feels like a delegible query in Power BI. So what you're saying is, I'm going to govern my external data in my Unity Catalog Lakehouse, but when I run a query against a table that is Lakehouse federated, like a Snowflake table or a Google BigQuery table, it will run on the underlying database there. The next one is data access auditing. So all events are captured in a Unity Catalog. You can enable this, and there's some documentation here. I can send some of these slides around after this session as well. And the next one, this is something which Femi mentioned at the start of our presentation, which there's the English SDK for Apache Spark. So this isn't strictly a Unity Catalog feature, but this allows you to write a Spark code in plain English. So you can write some English that says, get me the top 10 rows from these different tables, and it will generate the Spark SQL or PySpark commands to do that for you. And that's really powerful because it makes the the power of distributed computing a lot more accessible to people that aren't maybe familiar with Spark, for example. And more. So there's a lot more to be coming in Unity Catalog as well. And as I mentioned at the start, it's been Databricks is a big focus of Databricks for the past couple of years now. So what did we cover? What is Unity Catalog? So if you leave with nothing else, you can leave with this slide. Unity Catalog is a free production-ready solution for enterprise Databricks customers. It's a prerequisite for all new features released by Databricks. It's designed to give you better visibility into your data estate through monitoring and all of the other features we've covered today. It gives you simplified control over access, security, and governance. So you can see all of that in one place in the account console. And finally, just to say that if you're looking at Databricks to enable your data and AI strategy, UC is a must-have, in my opinion. So next steps after this session. So how can you begin adopting Unity Catalog? You can reach out to your Databricks account manager for more information regarding UC adoption. And there's some other useful resources. Obviously, there's loads of resources out there. These are just a couple I've highlighted. So if you're interested in specific training on Databricks, there is the Databricks Customer Academy. And you can speak to your Databricks account team about that. If you're more interested in Kubrick Group and how we can help you solve your data, cloud, and AI challenges, then our website is there. And I'll put some emails on the next slide as well. And finally, for each of your clouds, so AWS, GCP, or Azure, there will be a get started guide on the respective cloud platform there as well. So that's really a good place to start. And that leaves us with 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. So just to say thanks everyone for listening. If you have any specific Kubrick questions related to Kubrick, you can reach out to Joe Bettino-Jones from Kubrick. If you have some technical questions about Unity Catalog, feel free to send me an email. And likewise, for any account inquiries at Databricks, feel free to message Femi too. So I will pause there. And are there any questions from anyone in the chat? And it's worth saying as well, so myself, David and Femi will be staying on for the next 15 minutes if you have any questions that you'd like to discuss. So I've seen a couple of questions that have been asked and answered by David in the chat. So I'll repeat these for the benefit of everyone in the call. So does the AI suggestions improve as you populate comments on the table or downstream tables, etc.? So you can, as David's mentioned here, so you could update your AI suggested comments on particular tables as well. So if you've added more information to that table and you want to regenerate your AI comments, you can do that. So you might have added more columns, for example, or more records, then that is still valid, yes. And there's a question about, can you apply mask based on columns being given a tag? For example, columns being given the PII tag. That's a really good question. I'm not sure. I'd have to get back to you on that one, I think.
So I thought about this, Ben, and actually there is, in the information scheme, you get at the tags. So you're just writing a SQL function to do the redaction or the row limiting. So if you've set a tag in, you can get at that through the information schema in a function and actually do what you need to do in those. Everything that Databricks are doing in this space is very SQL standard centric. So, you know, in every other database I've ever used, it has these SQL functions and information schema and things like that. It's a very natural way to do this stuff. I was really interested actually in the question, and I don't know, if I'm honest, off the top of my head, about the comments and how they're generated. My guess is at the moment the comments are generated on the table object without reference to the wider schema. But the idea with Unity Catalog is to get all of your data assets and that the AI system to know about all of your data assets. So if this table is dependent on some other tables in your data pipeline, Unity Catalog and its AI systems behind it will know that and will actually be able to put that in your comments. And the pace at which Databricks are adding new features, the blistering pace, every 2 weeks, it seems to be a whole new set of capabilities that come out with the product. I'd be really surprised if that wasn't included very soon, if it isn't now.
Yeah, it's worth saying on that, David. So the benefit you get from running these queries in Unity Catalog, something which they demoed way back when they announced Unity Catalog, how many months or years ago this was now, was if you're running a query using the Apache Spark English SDK that says, get me all data from, a specific region in Europe, for example, it can recognize in your data what you as an organization refer to that region as. So there may be, differences across organizations, whether you refer to something as EMEA, or you might want to break it down into different regions. It will recognize that. And so you can get more intelligent queries from the English SDK, which is quite powerful. I think the same applies to the comments as well.
It is. It really opens up the access to that data to, not everybody in the world writes SQL.
There's a question that's just come in from, how would you compare Microsoft Purview to UC? And what's UC's edge in your opinion, if any? So I'll start with mine, and then David, feel free to put a comment on this as well. But the way that we see organizations using and adopting UC, so Purview's been around for longer than Unity Catalog is the first point. And it's likely that if you're considering using Microsoft Purview, you've probably already adopted it in some way at your organization. If you're now then adopting Unity Catalog as well, the way they'll interplay is this catalog of catalogs approach does seem quite popular. So Purview might be covering other areas of your Azure estate that you're not going to capture with Unity Catalog, but you can export the lineage from Unity Catalog into Purview. So essentially, it's not necessarily one or the other, it's more that they interplay together in that regard.
Yeah,
anything you want to add on that, David?
I Purview is much more integrated into the Microsoft ecosystem. There's things like information lifecycle management and control in things like your Excel files and your OneDrives and things like that Purview will do. And to be fair, Unity Catalog will never address that, and it's not within the remit of Databricks to be working in that space. So you're quite likely at an information control level to need several products here, and there are several sort of user personas that will access the data. At the moment, I see Unity Catalog as quite SQL centric in the way that you access it. It does have a GUI, and it does enable data governance professionals who aren't maybe hardcore data engineers or SQL coders to get at it. But that's I think they're building the capability at that level that's very standards driven and very SQL centric. Purview is much more an information governance officer's tool, and with a wider remit throughout the organization.
That's great. Thanks, David. So I think we've covered those questions that are in the chat. We'll stay online for any more questions that come on. But also feel free to send us any questions to these email addresses on the slide as well. So there's a question that's just come in. No problem.
I think Paresh is asking how Delta sharing ensures data security when data is shared across data products, let's say from Azure Delta Lake to another data platform based on AWS. It's a good question. And as far as I know, that there is control and security built into the data sharing product that gives you all of that access control. Do you want to? Do you have a take on that, Ben?
Yeah, it's probably worth saying that it's not. It doesn't really matter what you're connecting to. So I guess your limitations on the data sharing side are what the connectors are, and there's a number of connectors, right? So Pandas being one, for example, which is incredibly popular. So when you generate your share, which is your read-only connection of tables, and you generate your recipient, that recipient can really be anyone. You will then define who that is in your Databricks workspace, and then you will send them that URL, and they will download a config file that will have pre-signed short-lived access to those underlying files. Now, I believe it works the same for both AWS and Azure, but I'd have to look at the architecture diagrams to be sure. But the point is, it's not like sending from Azure to AWS necessarily in that way. There is Databricks-specific information on data sharing, so there's more information available for sending data between regions, and it works slightly differently. But I'll have to send you the docs on that one.
Yeah, it'll almost certainly be a robust security mechanism based on OAuth 2, which has a token architecture where the access that you're given to the data assets is very short-lived. So that it's not a credential that's available to if it was compromised, it would only give you short access to the data, and as well as that, data will be encrypted in flight and at rest. Those are just givens for sharing that kind of technology, and I know that data sharing ticks those boxes without a doubt.
Yeah. So there's a question for, let's say you have 4 workspaces under UC, but you want to grant someone access to manage all of the permissions of only one of those workspaces. Can you do that? So essentially, it depends what you're referring to for permissions, but I would say yes on this one. So the important thing is, what are the personas available to you in Unity Catalog? And there's a number of them. So there's the Metastore admin that's responsible for setting up and governing the Metastore, which is a very privileged role. There's the account admin, which is or personas or groups that are responsible for adding users to your account console. And then you have workspace admins, and workspace admins are a privileged persona as well. And you can add groups from the account console to your workspaces. So if you had the same, and you wanted to grant someone access to manage all of the permissions of only one of those workspaces, then yeah, it depends on the object owner, right? So you can have a workspace admin within a certain workspace, and then they could choose which groups are added to that workspace. And likewise across the other 3 workspaces. And for catalogs as well, you can bind catalogs to, so for data specifically, so we've covered the user side. For data specifically, you can bind catalogs to specific workspaces as well. So if you needed data to not be shared between workspaces, you can do that, and you can bind catalogs to workspaces. Catalogs being your kind of highest level of segregation of your data assets.
I think just to clarify that a little bit, Ben, I think the answer to that question is yes, absolutely, and easily as well. Ben has talked a lot about the other securable objects and permissions on workspaces, but doing things like letting somebody administer just one workspace but not have access to the others is really straightforward. There's a GUI and it's straightforward to that. We had a question about how you see it relates to the common data model. Is this sort of the common data model in the Microsoft world that we're talking about here? An enabler or a total rethink about how data is modeled. Unity Catalog, in terms of doing things like sharing and things like that, it doesn't put any strictures on the data structures that you're managing with Unity Catalog. So you can store delta tables, which you can query in SQL. You can store files, unstructured data. you can store AI models, and it will manage all of those, but it doesn't actually put any strictures on the structure. The common data model, as far as I know, is much more it's much more like a relational data structure that and business focused schema that's put on top of your data, and it doesn't really address that. They're sort of separate things in what they're trying to do, I would say.
Yeah. So yeah, regardless of your data model, Unity Catalog can still govern it in Databricks. I think is hopefully that answers the question. Okay. So I think that's pretty much time. So thanks everyone for joining, and thanks everyone that's still on. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us afterwards. And thanks everyone for coming.
Thanks for your great questions.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks for joining, guys. Have a good one.